What exactly is meant by the term of American novel, on which American advertisers and reviewers lay an equal and ever-increasing stress, a stress unparalleled in the literary language of other countries? To European critics, the term Great English or Great French novel signifies merely a great novel written by an English or French novelist. And the greatest French or English novel would be the greatest novel yet produced in one or the other of these literatures. It might be like Chartreuse de Parme, assuredly one of the greatest of French novels, a tale of 18th century Italian life, or, as in the case of Lord Jim or Nostromo or Kim, its scene might be set on the further side of the globe. It would nonetheless be considered typical of the national genius that went to its making, as, for example, La Tentation de Saint Antoine and Salammbô of Flaubert are considered, though the one is situated in Egypt in the 6th century of the Christian era, and the other in Carthage, 150 BC, whereas the Wrecker or the Eptide must be regarded by the life described in them as so largely an exotic setting. In the opinion of European critics, only one condition is needful to make a novel typical of the country of its origin: that its writer should possess in sufficient richness the characteristics of his race. John Inglesant is not considered less typically English than Lorna Doone, because it ranges through a cosmopolitan world reaching from the Tiber to the Thames, while the other tale concerns the intensely local lives of a handful of peasants in the west of England. And that's from The Great American Novel by Edith Wharton, Paraform. It would appear that in the opinion of the recent American reviewers, the American novelist must submit to much narrower social and geographical limitations before he can pretend to have produced the, or the greatest, or even simply an American novel. Indeed, the restrictions imposed appear to differ only in kind from those to which a paternal administration subjects drinkers of wine, wearers of short sleeves, and upholders of the evolutionary hypothesis. The range allotted is so narrow that the feat of producing the greatest American novel, if ever accomplished, will rank the author with the music hall artist who is locked and quartered into a trunk and then expected to get out of it in full view of his audience. First of all, the novelist's scene must be laid in the United States, and his story deal exclusively with citizens of those states. Furthermore, if his work is really to deserve the epithet American, it must tell of persons so limited in education and opportunity that they live cut off from all the varied sources of culture which used to be considered the common heritage of English-speaking people. The great American novel must always be about Main Street, geographically, socially, and intellectually. In an address made not long ago, Mr. Kipling cited the curious fate of certain famous books which, surviving the conditions that produced them, have become to later generations something utterly different from what their authors designed or their original readers believed them to be. The classic examples are The Merchant of Venice, a rough and tumble Jew baiting farce to Shakespeare's contemporaries, and Don Quixote, composed by Cervantes and accepted by his public as a gently humorous parody of the picturesque novel of the day. But Mr. Kipling found a still more striking instance in Gulliver's Travels, fiercest and most brutal of social, fiercest and most brutal of social satires when it was written, and now one of the favorites of the nursery. Some such fate, in a much shorter interval, has befallen Mr. Sinclair Lewis's Main Street, that pioneering work which, with a swing of the pen, hacked away the sentimental vegetation from the American small town and revealed Main Street as it is, with all its bareness in the midst of plenty. The novel was really epic making, but the epic it made turned into something entirely different from what its author proposed. Mr. Lewis opened the eyes of the millions of dwellers in all the American main streets to the inner destitution of their lives. But by doing so, apparently created in them not the desire to destroy Main Street, but only to read more and ever more about it. The dwellers in Main Street proved themselves to be like the old ladies who send for the doctor every day for the pleasure of talking over their symptoms. They do not want to be cured, they want to be noticed. It must not be regarded as diminishing Mr. Lewis's achievement to remind his readers that he was not the first to discover Main Street. Over 30 years ago, Robert Grant situated unleavened bread in the same thoroughfare, and so a little later did Frank Norris in his McTeague, and Graham Phillips in his Susan Lennox. And they were all, as it happens, not only great American novels, but great novels. But they came before their time. Their bitter taste frightened a public long nurtured on ice cream, soda, and marshmallows, and a quick growth of oblivion was trained over the dreary nakedness of the scene they had exposed. It was necessary that a later pioneer should arise and clear this vegetation away. Again, and if Mr. Lewis had done no more than demolish the tottering stage fictions of a lavender-scented New England, a chivalrous South, and a bronco-busting West, he would have rendered a great service to American fiction. This having been accomplished, however, it is permissible to wonder whether, as a theme, Main Street, in a literary sense, has not received as much notice as its width and length will carry, or even more. The difficulty is that it is now established as a canon, a first principle in the laws of American fiction, and thence it will be difficult to dislodge it. The term is, of course, used to typify something much more extended geographically than Mr. Lewis's famous thoroughfare Main Street has come to signify the common mean of American life anywhere in its million cities and towns, its countless villages and immeasurable wildernesses. It stands for everything which does not rise above a very low average in culture, situation, or intrinsic human interest, and also For every style of depicting this dead level of existence, from the photographic to the pornographic, sometimes inclusively. The novelist's, any novelist's proper field, created by his particular way of apprehending life, is limited only by the bounds of his natural, his instinctive interests. The writer who sees life in terms of South Sea cannibals, as Herman Melville did, who wastes his time, as incidentally Melville did, if he tries to depict it as found in drawing rooms and conservatories, though this by no means implies that the cannibal is intrinsically a richer or more available subject than the inhabitant of drawing rooms. No subject is foreign to the artist in which there is something corresponding to a something within himself. The famous theory of the autres crochas is as true of affinities between novelists and subjects as those between one human being and another. To the creator, the only needful preliminary to successful expression is to have in him the root of the matter to be expressed. Nevertheless, there must always remain the question of the amount and quality of material to be extracted from a given subject. Other things being equal, nothing can alter the fact that a great argument will give a greater result than the perpetual chronicling of small beer. And the conditions of modern life in America, so far from being productive of great arguments, seem almost purposely contrived to eliminate them. America has indeed deliberately dedicated herself to other ideals. What she has chosen and realized is a dead level of prosperity and security. Main Street abounds in the unnecessary. Main Street abounds in the unnecessary, but lacks the one thing needful, inheriting an old social organization which provided for nicely shaded degrees of culture and conduct. Modern America has simplified and tailorized it out of existence, forgetting that in such matters the process is necessarily one of impoverishment, as she has reduced the English language to a mere instrument of utility, for example, by simplifications as the substituting of a would or mysteriously a woods for the innumerable shadings of coppice, copse, spinning, covert, break, bolt, grove, etc. So she has reduced relations between human beings to a dead level of vapid benevolence, and the whole of life to a small house with modern plumbing and heating, a garage, a motor, a telephone, and a lawn undivided from one's neighbors. Ouch! Great as may be the mutual advantage of these diffused conveniences, the safe and uniform life resulting from them offers the artist's imagination a surface as flat and monotonous as our own prairies. If it be argued that the greatest novelists, both French and English, have drawn some of their richest effects from the study of narrow lives and parochial problems, the answer is that Balzac's provincial France, Jane Austen's provincial England, if limited in their external contacts compared to a Main Street linked to the universe by telephone, motor, and wireless, nevertheless made up for what they lacked in surface by the depth of the soil in which they grew. This indeed is still true of the dense old European order, all compounded of differences and nuances, all interwoven with intensities and reticences, with passions and privacies, inconceivable to the millions brought up in a safe, shallow, and shadowless world. It's because we have chosen to be what Emerson called mixed of middle clay that we offer, in spite of all that patriotism may protest to the contrary, so meager and material to the imagination. It's not because we are middle class, but because we are middling, and that our story is so soon told. Ouch! Another reason to be found precisely in that universal facility of communication, the lack of which might seem to have made the life of Balzac's narrow towns all the narrower. In fact, that life was not only fed from the deep roots of the past, the long confused inheritance of feudalism, burgherdom, diocesan and monastic influences, the activities of the guilds, the dogged labors of the peasants, and the fervors of an ornate religion. It had, besides, the concentrated flavor which comes of long isolation, bad roads, slow communications, dangers from flood and foe, all these factors for generations, for centuries combined to make each little town a hotbed for its own idiosyncrasies. Even in the English novel of Trollope's day, a day so much airier and more sanitated, the weight of a long past and the comparative isolation of each social group helped to differentiate the dull people and to give a special color to each of their humdrum backgrounds. Only when mediocrity has achieved universal diffusion does it become completely unpaintable. Nothing is less easy to standardize than the curve of an artist's secret affinities. But literary criticism in modern America is a perpetual incentive to standardization. The public, as everywhere and always, likes best what it has had before. The magazine editor encourages the young writer to repeat his effects, and the critic urges him to continue himself to the portrayal of life in the American small town, or in New York or Chicago, as viewed from the small town angle. Good joke. Still more insistent is the demand of reviewers that the novelist shall deal only with what the wife of one of our late presidents touchingly described as just folks. The idea that genuineness is to be found only in the rudimentary, and that whatever is complex is unauthentic, is a favorite axiom of the modern American critic. To students of natural history, such a theory is somewhat disconcerting. The tendency of all growth, animal, human, social, is towards an ever-increasing complexity. The mere existence of art as a constant form of human expression, the recurring need of it shown by its reappearance in every age of history, proves man's inherent inability to live by bread alone. Traditional society, with its old-fashioned distinctions of class, its passwords, exclusions, delicate shades of language and behavior, is one of man's oldest works of art, the least conscious and the most instinctive, yet the modern American novelist is told that the social and educated being is an unreality unworthy of his attention, and that not only the man with a dinner pail is human, and hence available for his purpose. Um, that's some pretty rough stuff. Mr. Van Wyck Brooks makes much of Howells' resonant but empty reply to Henry James's complaint that there was little material for novelists in a rudimentary social order. There is the whole of human nature. But what does human nature, thus denuded, consist in? And how much of it is left when it is separated from the web of custom, manners, culture? It is elaborately spun about itself. Only the hollow unreality, man, an evocation of the 18th century demagogues who were the first inventors of standardization, as to real men, unequal, unmanageable, and unlike each other. They are all bound up with the effects of climate, soil, laws, religion, wealth, and above all, leisure. Leisure itself, the creation of wealth, is incessantly engaged in transmuting wealth into beauty by secreting the surplus energy which flowers in great architecture, great painting, and great literature. Only in the atmosphere thus engendered floats the impalpable dust of ideas, which is the real culture. A colony of ants or bees will never create a Parthenon. It is a curious and deeply suggestive fact that America's acute literary nationalism has developed an intense ratio to the growth of modern traveling facilities, and in exact proportion to the very recent Americanization of the majority of our modern literary leaders. Like all Anglo-Saxons, the old-time Americans came of a wandering and exploring stock, unlike the Latins. We have never been sedentary except when it was too difficult to get about. Old New York and Old New England, owing to this difficulty, sat chiefly at home, and, as Henry James somewhere has it, brightened their leisure by turning the pages of a volume of Flaxman outlines in a bare parlor, looking out on a snowy landscape. But in those steamless and wireless days, Poe was letting his fiery fancy range over all heaven and earth. Melville was situating his tales in the tropics, and Hawthorne coloring his with the pristine hues of a largely imaginary historic past. Our early novelists were, in fact, instinctively choosing those scenes and situations which offered the freest range to their invention without fear of being repudiated as un-American if they wandered beyond the 12-mile limit. It's doubtful if a novelist of one race can ever really penetrate into the soul of another. And hitherto the attempts to depict foreign characters from the inside have resulted in producing figures very much like Englishmen, the Englishmen of the French farce, or the Frenchman of Punch. Even Meredith, James, and Trollope never completely achieved the trick, and their own racial characteristics peeped disconcertingly through the ill-fitting disguise. But there is another way of catching the likeness of the foreigner, and that is in his idiosyncrasies. Are reflected in the minds of the novelist's characters, who are of the latter's own kin. This is a special field which the nomadic habits of modern life have thrown wide open to the American novelist. 30 years ago, in attempting this kind of reflected portraiture, he was hampered by the narrowness of the reflecting surface. The the traveling American of that day was almost always a mild dilettante en route for the Colosseum or the Chateau of Chillon, and his contacts with the indigenous were brief and superficial. Now innumerable links of business, pleasure, study, and sport join together the various races of the world. The very novelists who still hug the Main Street superstition settle down in the Latin Quarter or on the Riviera to write their tales of the little suburban house at number at number 1,010,000 Volstead Avenue. And exploring is no longer one-sided. The same motives which send more and more Americans abroad now draw an annually increasing number of foreigners to America. The perpetual interchange of ideas and influences resulting on both sides of the globe in the creation of a new world, ephemeral, shifting, but infinitely curious to study and interesting to note. And yet, and as yet hardly heeded by the novelist, it is useless, at least for the storyteller, to deplore what the new order of things has wiped out. Vain to shudder at what it is creating there, whether for better or worse. And the American novelist, whose compatriots have helped above all others to bring it into being, can best use his opportunity by plunging both hands into the motley welter. As the merry person says in the prologue to Faust, wherever you see it, there it is interesting. Wherever you seize it, there it is interesting. If not in itself, at any rate as a subject for fiction, as a new opening into that full life of men, which is the proper theme of the novelist's discourse.